You're so inefficient. That's why it takes you forever to do the housework. I pretended not to hear and ignored him. Unfazed, Lucas carried on with his words. It's true what they say, women who quit after middle school are just plain dumb. You're an eyesore, so please just go somewhere else. Though I was infuriated, I chose to continue ignoring him. Finding it unamusing that I didn't react, Lucas came over to me deliberately to keep spewing insults. You've been listening all this while, right? I don't want to be around someone incompetent, so just disappear already. What do you mean all this while? Stop it with these insults. We're not children here. Seemingly pleased to finally get a reaction, Lucas smirked and said. Shut up. You're the lowest of the low, don't act like you're my mother. At those words, I realized there was no need to hold back anymore. That's right, your real mother is that woman, after all. What? My name is Olivia, and I'm a homemaker. I married my husband, Brandon, 7 years ago, and we've had a good relationship. However, there was one issue. It was Brandon's son, Lucas. Brandon had been divorced once, and custody was granted to him. The first time I met Lucas, he was 11 years old. Lucas, then in 5th grade, was initially shy, but he quickly warmed up to me. Seeing this, Brandon started to consider marriage seriously. We would go shopping together and took family trips, building a good relationship despite not being related by blood. Now, Lucas is 18 years old. He's in his senior year of high school and going through a difficult age. I was struggling with how to interact with Lucas. Back when Lucas was in middle school, he was quite smart and good-looking. Apparently, his good looks made him quite popular. Though he didn't report every detail to me, I noticed letters from girls, presumably admirers, carelessly left on his desk several times. During Valentine's, he would come home holding more chocolates than he could carry with both hands. On the day of his middle school graduation, Lucas invited several close friends over to our house after the ceremony. And they seemed to have a great time chatting. I decided to bring them some snacks and drinks on a tray, and as I approached Lucas's room to knock on the door. At that moment, the conversation I overheard made my body freeze in place. But that was cruel, man. How could you say such awful things? What are you talking about? Sophia confessed to you, right? I'm talking about that. Oh, that ugly girl with glasses? I was shocked to hear Lucas speak so dismissively about a girl's appearance. It was the first time I'd heard such vile words from him. How could she think she could confess to me with a face like that? She should know her place, he said. That's harsh. So, I told her to check herself in the mirror before confessing to someone like me, to save herself from further embarrassment. Seriously, man, you're so popular. How many girls confessed to you today? I remember up to about 6, but I stopped counting after that. Wow, that's amazing. Hearing them laugh about it filled me with dread. In front of us, Lucas had always been the perfect student. He had never once spoken ill of anyone. But I realized it was all an act. Behind his parents' backs, he was belittling women in such a derogatory manner. With resolve, I knocked on Lucas's door. I brought some snacks. Can I come in? Then the door opened. There was Lucas, smiling sweetly. Thank you, Mom. As I handed the tray to Lucas, I struggled to give him as natural a smile as possible. Lucas had enrolled in a well-known high school in the area. He wants to work as a doctor in the future. For that reason, he had decided early on to attend a high school that offers a solid academic foundation for students aspiring to become doctors. As a result, Lucas passed the entrance exams with ease. On graduation day, I saw Lucas's true nature. Although I tried to remain calm, it seemed Lucas sensed the awkwardness. Up until then, he had played the role of the perfect student, but he decided to drop that act in front of me alone. He began to make dismissive remarks about women, regardless of my presence. One weekday evening, Lucas and I were in the living room. He was sitting on the sofa, fiddling with his phone in front of the TV broadcasting the evening news. I was preparing dinner while listening to the news in the background. Brandon was still hours away from coming home. Then, a news story was broadcast. It was about a woman who had been arrested for marriage fraud. Hearing the news, Lucas called out to me. Mom, check out this news. What's up? I wiped my hands on my apron and moved closer to the TV, staring intently at the screen. Lucas snorted with a laugh and scoffed. Marriage fraud, huh? Ridiculous. It's despicable to go after a man's money. It's a disgrace. While thinking his tone was sarcastic, I stared at the face of the woman who was the marriage scammer. Then, her real name was broadcasted. Having her real name exposed over such a scandal, her future looks bleak. But it's the price she pays for her foolishness. Regardless of the reason, it's not right to take someone else's money. Well, then you're on the same level as this woman. What? Taken aback by his unexpected words, I could only manage a flustered reply. When I quickly turned towards Lucas, he was smirking at me. You knew Dad was a senior executive at a large corporation when you suggested remarrying, right? Blinded by money, just like that woman. Weren't you? I was shocked. When Lucas was young, I treated him as my own child, even though we were not related by blood. I thought he cared for me too. Even in middle school, I thought we had a good parent-child relationship. Yet, he believed I married Brandon for his money. That's not true. I love your dad and always wanted to be with him, and I've treated you as my own child. Easy to say. It's true. Your dad would only remarry someone who could get along with you. He can spot someone who's after his money a mile away. And he wouldn't want to be close to someone like that. You played it well, didn't you? Knowing Dad prioritizes me, you used me as leverage to marry up. You're just a femme fatale. Why think in such a twisted way? Because women deceive men and leech off them. You're living off Dad's money without working, just a freeloader. That's not true. There's a reason I'm a homemaker. Cutting off my words, Lucas spoke with increased intensity. You're no better than that marriage fraudster we just saw. With a huff, Lucas smugly walked to his room. This was the first time I had been directly targeted with such malice. He insulted me as a freeloader, thinking I married Brandon for his money. I never expected such harsh words from someone I raised as my own son. Stunned, I just stared blankly at the door Lucas had exited through. The news had long since switched topics, but I couldn't hear any of it. At dinner that day, I struggled with whether to tell Brandon about Lucas's verbal abuse. This isn't just a phase of rebellion. I believe it's a fundamental issue with Lucas's character. However, if I don't explain it well, there's a chance Lucas might misunderstand again. I can easily imagine him saying, "Women have it easy," thinking they can just rely on Dad to sort things out. Dumb people think they'll get help just by crying. These are the kinds of things I feared he would say. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to say anything to Brandon that day. Lucas seemed to understand this too. The three of us sitting at the dining table. It appeared no different than the day before. Except for Lucas occasionally casting condescending looks my way. The meal tasted bland that night. From then on, whenever it was just the two of us, Lucas made belittling comments. However, he never showed such behavior in front of Brandon. It's clear that he's targeting just me. He continues doing this, knowing that I won't talk back or tell Brandon. Lucas seems to hold typical misogynistic views. Being around someone with such beliefs could influence him, perhaps. However, Brandon does not look down on me for being a homemaker. Instead, he always expresses his gratitude, saying there is never a day off for housework. Thank you for keeping our home every day. He was far from a misogynist. It was puzzling where Lucas had picked up such outdated ideas. On one day off, with Brandon out, only Lucas and I were at home. Since the day he had hurled insults at me, I had tried to avoid being alone with him. I'll finish the chores quickly and go to the bedroom, I thought. As I was thinking this, Lucas, lounging on the sofa, started speaking loudly on purpose. You're so inefficient. That's why housework takes you forever. I pretended not to hear and ignored him. Unfazed, Lucas carried on with his words. It's true what they say, women who quit after middle school are just plain dumb. You're an eyesore, so please just go somewhere else. Though I was infuriated, I chose to continue ignoring him. Finding it unamusing that I didn't react, Lucas came over to me deliberately to keep spewing insults. You've been listening all this while, right? I don't want to be around someone incompetent, so just disappear already. I sighed deeply and looked at Lucas's face. What do you mean? Stop it with these insults. We're not children here. Seemingly pleased to finally get a reaction, Lucas smirked and said, "Shut up. You're the lowest of the low, don't act like you're my mother." At those words, I realized there was no need to hold back anymore. That's right, your real mother is that woman, after all. What? No, never mind. Confused by my words, Lucas stood there dumbfounded. Although he might have wanted to know the reason, I simply said, "You don't want to see my face anymore, right?" And decided to leave the living room. Lucas's verbal abuse continued as usual. He must have been upset that I had stood up to him that day. Lucas's words became increasingly harsh over time. However, I continued to ignore him with a poker face. After all, I thought, there's no need to care about someone who would speak so cruelly to his mother, even if she is his stepmother. And those words. Don't act like you're a mom. You're the lowest of the low. It hurt me deeply. Being spoken to like that, I lost all desire to treat him as a mother would. At 18, he's practically an adult, and if he feels that way, I don't need to make any further effort. I decided to only provide the minimal necessary care. I never thought of myself as overprotective, and in front of Brandon, I'd continue playing the part of a good family. This incident made me realize that I tend to hold grudges. Lucas seemed displeased with my demeanor when we were alone. Perhaps he thought I ignored his insults because I was weak. Or maybe he thought I was appeasing him, worried that Brandon might leave me if I treated his son badly. However, me showing a bit of backbone might have made him feel like he was being looked down upon. Of course, I wasn't belittling him. But it seemed he didn't take it that way. In fact, I neither pushed him away nor did I coddle him. My attitude might have irked him even more. Hey. Lucas started to speak to me. I glanced at him sideways, wondering whether to ignore him. His demeanor wasn't the usual condescending one, nor was it the perfect student act he put on for Brandon. He looked serious. What did you mean by what you said before? What are you talking about? I genuinely didn't understand and asked Lucas to clarify. Thinking I was dodging the question, Lucas seemed a bit irritated and asked again. I mean, when you said your real mother is that woman. What was that about? Oh, that. I finally realized. He remembered something I had muttered. For a moment, I hesitated to tell the truth. The story about Lucas's real mother wasn't a pleasant one. Glancing at Lucas, I saw he was waiting for my words with a serious look. He was an adult now. Perhaps it was time to tell him the truth. I decided to tell him the facts. Do you remember the news we watched together? The one about the woman arrested for marriage fraud? Yeah, I remember. They showed her face and even broadcast her real name. What does that have to do with my mom? That woman is your real mother. What? Lucas stared at me, his eyes wide open. Initially, his face showed shock, but soon confusion and suspicion appeared in his eyes. It was clear he felt disbelief, not wanting to believe it. What are you saying? Are you trying to get back at me for all the awful things I've said? You really are a wicked woman. Panic was evident in Lucas's voice. I wish it were a lie, but it's the truth. Lucas's expression was one of sheer despair. He looked so defeated, as if he might collapse at any minute. When I saw that news, I recognized the woman's face. I was wondering who she was when they broadcast her name, and I thought she might be your real mom. Your dad also saw the news online and confirmed it, so there's no mistake. But why do you know what my real mother looks like? Have you actually met her? I had decided to answer all his questions truthfully when this conversation started. Lying here would only raise suspicions. I've never met her in person, but your father showed me photos and told me about her. He warned me to run if she ever showed up. Run? What do you mean by that? I relayed to Lucas the story Brandon had once told me. Even if it was a harsh reality for Lucas. The reason for the divorce was your real mother's bad relationships with men. Even when they were living together, she was indulging herself with money from various men. Brandon tried to intervene, but she wouldn't change her ways. Concerned about the bad influence on you, Brandon decided to divorce her and take you with him. Lucas seemed unable to speak from the shock. Before I knew it, he had collapsed to his knees. Because she seemed like someone who would do the unimaginable for money, there was a fear she might kidnap you to ask for money. That's why I was told to remember her face and to take you and run if anything happened. No. I'm so brilliant and my real mother was such a scoundrel? Muttering to himself, Lucas looked shattered, and seeing this, the seed of vengeance within me flared up. The woman you've constantly disparaged is your real mother. How does it feel to know you were born from such a woman? Hearing my cold words, Lucas looked at me. His expression mixed with shock, sadness, and various negative emotions. I was surprised that such harsh words came out of my mouth. Yet, my expression remained unchanged, icy as I looked down at Lucas kneeling before me. That day, Lucas stayed locked in his room and didn't come out. Brandon tried talking to him from outside the door, but got no response. Brandon asked about the situation, so I just told him that he was shocked to learn about his real mother. Brandon seemed to understand and simply responded, "I see." Though my words might have been insufficient, they were not a lie. Serves him right. Dark feelings spread within me. From then on, Lucas became much quieter. Even when we were alone, he stopped hurling insults at me. Instead, he seemed to avoid being alone with me, spending more time in his room. The roles had reversed from before. I felt a mix of regret for possibly going too far and justification considering what I had endured. One day, while the three of us were having dinner, Lucas only smiled in response when Brandon spoke to him, otherwise he quietly ate his meal. He probably hasn't noticed the situation. Then, Brandon started talking to me. "By the way, I met Robert today, the manager from the company you used to work for. Wow, it's been a while. Was he doing well?" "Yes, he seemed fine. He asked about you, so I told him you're doing well." As we chatted happily, Lucas looked puzzled and joined the conversation. "What are you talking about?" "Mom, you used to work? Haven't I mentioned it? Your mother and I met through work." "Really?" "Yes. Your mother was working for a company that did business with mine. She really came on strong." "Stop, that's embarrassing." I stopped Brandon as he began to share our courtship story, and we both laughed again. Listening to us talk, Lucas looked unconvinced, his expression one of disbelief. He pressed on, appearing slightly panicked. "But Dad's business partners were all major firms. There's no way Mom could have worked at such a company with just a middle school education." Now it was Brandon's turn to look puzzled. "What are you talking about? Your mother is well educated." "What?" Lucas looked shocked, his eyes darting between Brandon and me. "Your mother actually graduated from university." "Well, she attended school in Germany for both high school and college." "What?" "Germany. My parents decided to move to Germany for work when I was young. Although I could have stayed in the US given my age. I thought living abroad would be a valuable experience, especially since knowing German could be an advantage in my career. I still think it was a good experience. When the transfer to Germany was finalized, my parents apparently debated whether to take me with them. They considered whether my father should go alone, or if my mother and I should stay behind in the US. However, I spoke up about wanting to live in Germany as a family. Living abroad for an extended period isn't something you can do any day. Though leaving familiar surroundings was daunting, in retrospect, it was an invaluable experience. Being abroad as a family instead of studying alone must have been better, right? Absolutely. It was good not to feel all alone. I think I would have definitely become homesick if I had studied abroad by myself. Perhaps staying together as a family is what kept me from running away. Wait, so you can speak German? I haven't used it for a while, so I might not handle specialized topics, but I think I can manage simple everyday conversations. Once you reach university, the classes become more specialized, naturally filled with German jargon. While I may not remember everything, I could watch movies without subtitles. In fact, I also worked as an interpreter. I can speak a bit, but not as fluently as Olivia, so I was always a bit jealous. Should we make it a rule to speak only German at home? If we do that, our conversation might dry up real quick. Contrastingly, Lucas muttered to himself, looking a bit upset. I always thought Mom was just a middle school graduate. Why would you think that? Anyway, not going to high school isn't a bad thing. It's not always about academic degrees when it comes to working for others. Brandon chided Lucas with a tone of mild exasperation. But if you have such impressive academic credentials, why didn't you continue working? That's... As I hesitated on how to explain, Brandon started speaking, cutting me off. It's okay, I'll explain. Lucas, you know about your real mother already, right? Yes. Lucas nodded. He then cast his gaze down at the table. To be honest, her actions were quite a shock. There was a time I couldn't trust women anymore. Brandon began speaking slowly, choosing his words carefully. At first when I met him, he had just divorced and was visibly exhausted, both mentally and physically. He had bags under his eyes and had confided in struggling to soothe his son, who would often cry at night in the absence of his mother. However, after meeting Olivia, I was saved. She tried to understand my pain. Seeing you playing happily with Olivia, I realized you needed a mother. That's why I decided to remarry. Lucas remained silent, looking down. Brandon continued speaking. And it was me that asked her to become a homemaker. Really? Lucas looked up at Brandon, surprised. Brandon slightly lowered his shoulders but still smiled back at Lucas. I was resistant to the idea of taking away Olivia's career for my own selfish reasons. But I was anxious about whether she might leave us like your mother did, who was often out and had poor relations with men. I wanted a home where you and Olivia would greet me when I come home. Olivia agreed to my selfish request. Oh. Whether Lucas was confused knowing Brandon's true feelings, or shocked that the mother he had underestimated was actually a university graduate and had worked for a major company, was unclear from his expression. Honestly, marrying someone with a young child in elementary school was a big decision for Olivia. Brandon continued speaking. Whether Lucas was absorbing this was uncertain. And on top of that, being asked to quit her job after we got married. I'm truly grateful she came along with me. You should understand that too. Brandon gently patted Lucas's head, who remained looking down. Lucas usually shies away from touch, swatting hands away, but today he didn't resist. He kept looking down, his expression hidden from view. Weeks after the day I shared about my past, Brandon came home with a stern look. Lucas was in his room, and I was the only one in the living room. Hey, you're back. What's wrong? Did something happen? Why do you ask? Your forehead is wrinkled. I pointed to my own forehead and furrowed my brows, mimicking him. Brandon managed a slight smile at this, but his brows soon knitted back together. If it's something you can talk about, I'm here to listen. Thank you. He said just that and fell silent again. Wondering if it was best not to pry, I went about reheating dinner. After serving the warm meal, Brandon gestured for me to sit down. I obediently followed his request. Will you listen? He then began to speak in fits and starts. The next day, after dinner with the three of us, Lucas was about to return to his room when Brandon stopped him. Lucas, there's something we need to discuss, sit down. Brandon called out to Lucas with a weighty voice. The atmosphere tensed up, different from his usual demeanor. Lucas, sensing something, silently took his seat. Do you know a woman named Sophia? Caught off guard by the abrupt question, Lucas paused to think before answering that he did not know her. Brandon sighed. I see. You don't remember, then? Remember? Have I met this Sophia? Perhaps it's true that those who inflict pain soon forget their victims. Brandon said, his voice growing shaky. Lucas tried to read Brandon's expression, but Brandon covered his face with his hand, avoiding eye contact with Lucas. I've been thinking since you asked, but I really have no idea who this Sophia is. Upon hearing Lucas's words, Brandon looked up. His eyes were filled with sadness. Does it ring a bell if I say she confessed to you on the day of your middle school graduation? Lucas's face turned pale instantly. You look as if you're wondering how I know this. Lucas's gaze fell to his fists, clenched on the table. His hands appeared to be trembling slightly. Sophia is my boss's daughter. She confessed to someone at her middle school graduation, was harshly rebuked, and was so hurt she couldn't leave her room for days. As I heard my boss speak, I thought it could be the same school as you. When I managed to get the name of that someone, it was you. But I won't listen to excuses. Brandon sharply interrupted, just as Lucas was about to defend himself. I debated whether to discuss this with you, but first I wanted to consult your mother. It seems that on the day of the graduation, you invited friends over and made Sophia the butt of your jokes. Startled and sweating, Lucas turned abruptly and glared at me. You wicked woman. Tattling on me. Don't mess with me. Lucas yelled at me. In that moment, his face changed from anger to fear as he turned to look at Brandon. Brandon's face was expressionless. It's not like that, Dad. What do you mean, it's not like that? To speak to Olivia with such harsh words. I'm deeply disappointed in you. Brandon sighed deeply and turned his face away from Lucas. It was a clear gesture of rejection. Wait, listen to me. No matter how much you explain, I can't understand why you would insult women. Besides, shouldn't you be apologizing to your mother right now instead of making excuses to me? Hearing this, Lucas stood up from his chair and came over to me to apologize. I'm sorry, Mom. I won't say horrible things anymore. Please forgive me. Lucas apologized. He seemed to be waiting for a response. I slowly began to speak. I'm sorry, but an apology prompted by someone else is hardly trustworthy. Lucas's posture remained unchanged. However, his fingers were tense, trembling slightly. He must have been angry that I wouldn't forgive him even after saying his apologies. You've said terrible things to me many times when your dad wasn't around. I can't trust someone like that. You need to realize that what you've done deserves to be criticized. And feel ashamed for belittling others unnecessarily. With that, Brandon left the living room. I hesitated for a moment, wondering whether to follow him or stay. But I decided to follow Brandon. It was enough his father was criticizing him. If he felt he was being pitted by someone he had looked down on, Lucas's pride would be shattered. Leaving him alone was an act of kindness. I opened the living room door and glanced back at Lucas, who stood staring blankly at the ceiling. Lucas was in a rough state. Brandon had told him that once he graduated high school, he should move out of the house. Stand on your own as a man. He said so, but it was uncertain what Lucas might do in enragement. I understood that Brandon was trying to protect me from further harm. Lucas applied to university, but the shock of being disowned by his father resulted in poor grades. He didn't even pass the safety net universities. After high school, Lucas left home and was supposed to be preparing for exams. But he couldn't bring himself to attend prep school and mostly stayed shut in at home. Feeling somewhat guilty, I mentioned to Brandon, perhaps we were too harsh on him, to which he replied. Lucas has always been able to do everything well and handle things smoothly, so he doesn't know frustration. The first time he faces it might be shocking enough to immobilize him, but those who experience failure can become kinder. It's part of a parent's duty to be strict sometimes, and he smiled at me. As for me, Brandon and I are living happily together. With Lucas gone, I found myself with more time alone, and Brandon suggested I could try working outside again. It was a delightful suggestion since I had always enjoyed working. However, I wanted to be home when Brandon returned. Perhaps working part-time would be a good balance. Thus, I found myself excited about starting a new phase of life.